and opinions expressed by callers, guests, and hosts do not necessarily reflect those of the Black Talk Radio Network and Black Talk Media Project. Black Talk Radio is new black media for the new millennium.
Conversation reparations. Welcome. My name is Brother Jumoke Ise Tayo. I currently serve as the Southeast Regional Representative of Encobra. We bring you this program twice a month. I'm giving you information and news about what's going on in the reparations movement and interviewing those people who are making history and who have participated in making history or making our story, as we like to say, on the road towards reparations. So this show is brought to you by Encobra, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. Our website is encobraonline.org, encobraonline.org. So today we're going to have a conversation about what are some of the, about a historical event, the We Charge Genocide movement, but we're also going to bring it contemporary to an event that will be happening at the United Nations on September the 4th of this year. And so, as we said, since we've started this, I call it, the second iteration of the conversation reparations. We were down for a few months and came back up. And just in that short period that we were down, the reparations movement continued to even pick up even faster. And so what we decided to do was, because there's so many things happening in the news about reparations, and knowing that we couldn't cover all of them in every episode, so we said, well, let's just give some news briefs about some of those, and eventually we will try to get some of those people on that are addressing these things that are happening in the news. So our first news story is that the Detroit City Council, and Detroit has such a rich history in the reparations movement. Oh my goodness. So we're not surprised. The Detroit City Council considers putting reparations on the November ballot as a referendum. If approved, a proposal sponsored by the City Council President Pro Tem Mary Sheffield would ask voters on November, and I quote, should the city of Detroit establish a reparations committee to make recommendations for housing and economic development programs that address historical discrimination against the black community in Detroit, close quote. And so I understand that bill is actually a follow-up to another resolution that was passed acknowledging racial discrimination in Detroit. And so, again, as we've been talking about on the show, we're seeing reparations really unfold even faster at the local level, at city level, at colleges. And here is yet another example. Also in the reparations news, let's move over to California. And we talked about California passing its reparations bill, but now California is paying reparations to victims of forced sterilization in state prisons. The nation known as the land of the free once had a sanctioned eugenics program that inspired the Nazi Germany. Imagine that. California Governor Gavin Newsom has signed the state budget, and included in that budget is $75 million in reparations for survivors of forced sterilizations of prison inmates allowed under the state's eugenics laws. Thousands of women, some of whom were sterilized without their consent as early as 11 years ago, are set to be paid in an effort by the state to make right its egregious and immoral sanctioning of a practice that denied incarcerated women the right to decide what to do with their own bodies. According to ABC Channel 7, California will be the third state in the U.S. to pay reparations to the victims of forced sterilization, and the first to pay them to women who were victimized while incarcerated. And I understand that also happened in your state, in North Carolina, right, brother?
Yes, it did. It was in the news a lot a couple of years ago. Well, it might have been maybe 5 or 10 years ago. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm saying your state, just for our listeners, we're talking about the state of North Carolina, which is where our engineer resides. Go ahead, brother.
So I may not have understood your question, but North Carolina had a eugenics program that was going on while I was in high school in the 80s. It didn't end until the 80s.
Yeah. And so I understand that some bills were passed to compensate in some kind of way those women who were victim of those experiments.
Yeah, it was more than just women. It was more than just women, and it was men and women, and it was people that your neighbor could call and say, "Hey, that teenager over there is very promiscuous. I think she might get pregnant or something." And it'll go before the eugenics board, and they'll vote on it, and they would forcefully have these people sterilized. Also, if you had a mental infirmity, they would sterilize them. And so when you was talking about in the previous story, a lot of people, they like to compare the United States today and some of the people to Hitler and Nazi Germany, but they lack the understanding that it was the United States that inspired Hitler and the Nazis.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah, this article referenced that as well. You're right. Yeah, so I'm going to read a little bit more. Oh, my goodness. I can't even explain the overjoyed feeling that I have, but also the feeling of relief, said survivor Kelly Dillion, whose story sparked an investigation into the state's eugenics practices after it was featured in the documentary Belly of the Beast, told ABC. Quote, the advocacy, the journey of justice we've been on has been 20 years for me, but for some survivors it's been over 40 years, unquote. In fact, according to The Guardian, the history of forced sterilization in California dates back to 1909 and was reportedly the inspiration for eugenics programs in Nazi Germany, we just mentioned. But investigators found hundreds of women were victimized by the practice as late as 2010, even though it was illegal by then. So that was just a few years ago. As for dealing, her attorney obtained medical records showing that when she was an inmate in the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla in 2001, the then 24-year-old underwent what was supposed to be an operation to take a biopsy and remove a cyst, but surgeons removed her ovaries during the procedure without her knowledge or consent. And, okay, excuse me, trying to scroll down in this article here. All right, and, oh my goodness. Okay, the state's new reparations initiative isn't stopping at women like Dillian who were victimized in prison. It's also looking to right wrongs dating back to the early history of the practice. The new California reparation program will also seek to compensate hundreds of living survivors of the state's earlier eugenics campaign, which was first codified into state law in 1909 and wasn't repealed until 1979. The law allows state authorities to sterilize people in state-run institutions who were deemed to have, what you just said, mental disease, which have been inherited and have likely to be transmitted to descendants. The law was later greatly expanded to include those suffering from perversion or marked departures from normal mentality. Well, what does that mean? Those targeted were often Black or Latino women, though some men were sterilized as well. California established these egregious eugenics laws that were actually even followed by Hitler himself in the effort to curb the population of unwanted individuals of people with disabilities, said the State Assemblywoman Wendy Carrillo, who introduced the bill to create the compensation program. She said in all, more than 20,000 people were sterilized in California, including the historic case prior to 1979 and hundreds of additional cases in the prisons documented until 2010. Many of the historical survivors have since died, but the state believes about 400 are still living, about a quarter of whom are expected to apply for compensation. According to ABC, a coalition of organizations will be tasked with finding survivors, some of whom are still unaware they were sterilized in state prisons. Officials estimate individual payments of up to $24,000, starting with an initial payment of around $12,000. Some might find it difficult to believe that the undeniable evil practice of forced sterilization went on for so long and until so recently. But if you know America, it isn't as much shocking as it is typical of the nation's history of cruelty towards people, society. Excuse me. It isn't as much shocking as it is typical of the nation's history of cruelty towards people society deems less than, especially considering the most recent cases involved primarily Black and Latino victims, according to The Guardian. Hopefully, every state in the nation with a similar history follows California and attempted to make amends for past evils.
Hey, Brother Jamoke.
I don't know if you had further comment on that.
Yeah, on a side note, you may have noticed this push against what they call critical race theory from right-wing Republicans and stuff. And this is really what it's aimed at doing is keeping this history hidden. And, you know, it's just an anti-intellectual movement. And, you know, critical race theory is the intersection of race and law. And this is what we're talking about. These were mandated by law. These were lawful sterilization programs. And the last thing I'll add, here in North Carolina, Hanes Corporation was implicated in that. You know, Hanes Underwear?
Right.
They were implicated in it and setting up these eugenics boards.
Wow. So much is coming out these days. We talked about that on an earlier show too. So much is being revealed and hopefully not just being revealed, not so much just the truth coming out, but also some form of amends and redress is being made as we are uncovering these stories, or not even just uncovering them, bringing them to the forefront. And because, you know, again, there are usually with most of these cases, there's always been some people that knew about them and even working and being an advocate for them. But now they're getting more and more attention and some redress. So we are excited about that in the reparations movement. Next article, next news story we want to talk about is the Virginia Theological Seminary. And actually, I visited that institution and met with the dean who is over the reparations program. A few years back, I'm not sure exactly, 2017, 2018, they passed a resolution to put $1.7 million. I'm sure if I read this, it'll come up into a fund for reparations for people who were enslaved workers or forced workers who worked in building the university, as well as maintaining the university after it was built. So their ancestors were enslaved workers. Now they're getting $2,100 a year in reparations. The campus of Virginia Theological Seminary, which is right outside of Washington, D.C., Linda Thomas' grandfather worked at the Virginia Theological Seminary for more than a decade, first as a farm laborer before moving up to head janitor. Her grandparents lived in a little white house on campus with their 4 children, including her mother. But until 2 years ago, she had no idea that her grandfather, John Samuel Thomas Jr., had been forced to work at the school in Alexandria just outside of Washington, D.C. All I knew was that he grew up on the seminary, said Johnson Thomas, 65, who lives in Mitchfield, Maryland. We knew there were slaves in Alexandria, but we didn't know the specifics. For more than a century during slavery, Reconstruction, and beyond, the seminary used black Americans for forced labor between 1823 and 1951. Hundreds of black people were forced to work for little or no pay on the campus as farmers, dishwashers, and cooks, among other jobs. Back then, the faculty members and the students also brought their own enslaved people, said Ebony Davis, an associate for program and historical research at the seminary. In 2019, the school announced it had set aside $1.7 million to pay reparations to the descendants of slaves who worked on its campus. Earlier this year, it made good on its promise and began handing out annual payments of $2,100 each to direct descendants of those who had worked there. Johnson Thomas and her 2 sisters were the first recipients. 15 people have received payments so far, and the seminary is expecting to compensate many more as they are identified. The cash payments began as conversations about reparations have rippled around the country since George Floyd's murder last year. Some cities have proposed reparations programs, while the House Judiciary Committee in April passed a bill which would create a commission to study reparations for descendants of enslaved Americans and recommend remedies. Some scholars of reparations say the seminary is the first such program in the country, but despite the promise of annual cash payments, its recipients were wary at first. I'm going to have to do something when I clip these articles to cut out this space. All right, I'll be a little bit more efficient next time. I got a little bit more efficient this time, and we'll get a little bit more efficient each time. The seminary was founded in 1823 and has educated many leaders of the Episcopal Church. The seminary has genealogists tracking down workers' descendants. Since it announced the reparations endowment fund in September 2019, the seminary has begun the Herculean task of tracking down direct descendants of its enslaved workers. It set up a task force. Genealogists pore over old documents to find relatives in the far-flung parts of the nation. And when they do, another group takes over the process of reaching out to the direct descendants. The conversations can be difficult. The money is given to the family generation as closest to the enslaved person or Jim Crow era laborer, often the grandchildren or great-grandchildren. The seminary started cutting checks for the descendants when described as shareholders in February. The $1.7 million endowment is expected to grow and continue to fund future payments. Though no amount of money could ever truly compensate for slavery, this is a quote from Reverend Ian Markham, quote, though no amount of money could ever truly compensate for slavery, the commitment of this financial resources means that the institution's attitude of repentance is being supported by actions of repentance, said Reverend Ian Markham, Dean and President of the Seminary statement. It opens up a moment for us to reflect along long and hard on what it will take for our society and institutions to redress slavery and its consequences with integrity and credibility. The endowment acknowledges the seminary's past participation in oppression and comes as the school prepares to celebrate its 5th in 2023. Quote, as we seek to mark the seminary's milestone of 200 years, we do so conscious that our part is a mixture of sin as well as grace, Markham said. Quote, this is the seminary recognizing that along with repentance for past sins, there also needs to be action. She hopes that reparations will help change the dialogue on race. Ms. Johnson. Ms. Johnson Thomas first heard about the reparations program 2 years ago when she learned her grandfather was one of the school's laborers. She was stunned. My first thought was disbelief, which is why I scheduled a meeting with the dean. She said her sister accompanied her for the meeting with Markham, who explained why the seminary chose to issue reparations. Quote, his point was, we are equal people, and we realize we recognize the racism in our past. We know there is no amount of money that can rectify that transpired back then, but we want to do something towards healing, Johnson Thomas said. This process has taught her about her grandfather, she said. She found out that while he worked at the seminary, he wanted to be a minister, but he could not get admission there because he was black. African Americans were not allowed to attend the seminary until 1951. But that did not stop him from digging into the books at the seminary and driving his Ford Model T on his days off to preach at a nearby church. Before his death in 1967, her grandfather had fulfilled his goal and become a Baptist minister in Washington, D.C. Johnson Thomas followed in his footsteps and is a Baptist minister too. By pursuing my master's degree from Howard University in 2000, I studied in the library at Virginia Theological Seminary. I had no idea that it was the same campus that denied my grandfather the right to pursue an education, she said. So there's more, but I'm going to stop there on that article. And
well, I did some quick math, Brother Jamoke. Did you hear me?
No, I didn't hear you.
I said I did some quick math. Now, is that $2,100 a month for the rest of their life?
I think that was $2,100 annual.
$2,100 annually, not $2,100 a month. Okay, yes. My bad. So we're not talking a whole lot of money here. See, 21.
No, we're not talking about a lot of money.
No, it's not. It's not. It's not a lot of money.
No, it's not.
But I do believe we might have our guest on the line if you want to go ahead and introduce our guest and what she'll be discussing.
Sure. Let me just give the brief headline of the other news story, and we can follow up with that on another show. So this has been in the news for the last couple of weeks now. The United Nations Human Rights Chief on Monday urged countries to, and I quote, fully fund comprehensive processes and take a wide range of reparations measures, unquote, to address the legacies of slavery, colonial rule, and racial discrimination. Michelle Bachelet presented to the United Nations Human Rights Council a landmark report launched after the killing of George Floyd in the United States and released last month. A year in the making, it hopes to build on the momentum around the intensified scrutiny worldwide of the blight of racism and its impact on people of African descent. And I really think that's worthy of a show itself. So we're going to see how we may put together a show around this United Nations Human Rights Council report and declaration. All right. Yeah. Oh, we have our guest on the line?
I believe so.
Okay, great. So we mentioned at the beginning of the show, we charge genocide, and we're at the 70th anniversary coming up in December of We Charge Genocide, which was really a profound movement and marker on the road for freedom and liberation and reparations for people of African descent, as a group of activists took a document to the United Nations, here in the United States as well as in Paris to declare the United States was practicing genocide against our people, against us, and that the United Nations should acknowledge this as well as take some actions to address this. And so we're going to talk with Empress Chi, who is just a phenomenal woman and organizer, networker, and is responsible for organizing the Million Woman March and continues to do great work in the Philadelphia area, really nationally and internationally, for liberation of people of African descent. So we'd like to bring her on and share with us what she's been doing around reparations and this We Charge Genocide movement. Sister Empress?
Yes, greetings, Mad Hotep.
Greetings.
How are you all this evening?
Good evening.
We're good. How are you?
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for having me with you tonight. I'm loving what I'm hearing.
Oh, very good, very good. What have you heard?
Well, I heard your reports, and of course, I think it's more of the synergy that I'm picking up on. You know, I like the format. I like the way you are, disseminating the information. And that's very important because, I'm into communication. So, again, a lot of times it's not just the information, but how it's being delivered, how it's been disseminated. So, I like the style.
Well, thank you. I think that's a compliment for someone who has a lot of years of experience in communication. Thank you. So let's, I gave a little introduction of yourself. If you would like to add to your introduction, or we could just go right into discussing
Yeah, if I may, I'd like to add a little because over the years I find that people have they've kind of had excuses as to why they should not recognize the Million Woman March for the historic and groundbreaking contributions that it has done, that it started with and continues to do. So one of the things that has been brought to my attention is that, no one knows who I am. Well, not no one, but, a lot of people don't know the name Sister Empress Chi or Dr. Fillet or whatever, and certainly no connection to that with the historic Million Woman March. So I kind of, made a pledge to my family in particular and those that are in some of my immediate circles that I would do better to change that situation. And it wasn't so much intentional. It's just that I had no real interest at the time in particular of being in spotlights and, all this other stuff that folks tend to do. That was never my intention. So for you not to know my name or not to be all popular, all that was cool with me because it was really about the work. But unfortunately, what I found is that, people are out here to rape you. And oftentimes the opportunist reality goes into effect, meaning if there's no face and no representation in a certain kind of way, then they'll just take it and do what they want to do. And those attempts have been made. And fortunately for us, we've been able to pretty much neutralize it, even with the so-called Women's March a few years ago. It created a lot of confusion, which was intended to do. That's because for many, the Million Woman March was not, very common or well known, or they didn't even know it was still existing or whatever, which we have continued for 24 straight years, by the way. We've had our radio program for 14 straight years. But it's just that we never wanted to be like others in that integrity is very important for us. We've never had a grant. We've never had corporate sponsoring in 24 years. That was intentional. I mean, it certainly slowed some things down in terms of what we could have accomplished. But when the ancestors give you an assignment, you can do one of two things. You can accept it as is, or you can try to do something else. Well, for me, I'm not that foolish. So it was designed a certain way, and it continued in a certain way. So with that said, I am indeed the originator of the historic Million Woman March. If anybody else tells you any differently, they're lying. And I have to say that because I've had people, rather.
Hold on just a second. So yes, you're listening to Black Talk Radio Network. We're at the halfway mark of our show. You're listening to Black Talk Radio Network, and this is Conversation Reparations being hosted on the Black Talk Radio Network. All right, go ahead, sister.
Thank you. And I'm going to cut that part short, but I just want to say I've literally had conversations with people who would sit and tell me, "Oh, I did so-and-so. I'm the mother of the Million Woman March." And I've had people to literally sit there not knowing who they were talking to.
Wow.
And say stuff that was just absolutely insane. Absolutely.
I hear you. So you're rebranding yourself. In America, in this, society, important that
absolutely
that your image and brand and name is important. I understand you are operating from the perspective of an activist, and I learned that from my father also, who was very much a behind the scenes activist, and he would push, the John Lewis's and the Jesse Jacksons and those out front, and did a lot of the behind the scenes organizing that people don't know about that's necessary to make stuff happen.
Right.
But, his name isn't out there as much as some of those people's names are. But so I understand that perspective of being behind the scenes and getting the work done. But then there also comes a time when you have to put your name out there, and we used to joke about that when he was running for office. And he would say stuff like, "When we organized," I said, "No, Dad, you got to say when I organized."
Right.
I know the collective we and the movement we and all of that, but people, you just start now while you're running for office. You need to claim some of your stuff. But anyway, let me get us off track. We'll stay on the main highway. So we thank you for that monumental achievement of the Million Woman March and what the movement continues to do. So why don't you just go ahead and tell us about the upcoming event for September 4th? Why don't we just go ahead right into that?
Absolutely. And as you indicated earlier, Nana Jamoke, the 70th year, and again, this is such a teachable moment, meaning this period of time. This is the 70th year that the great Paul Robeson and William Patterson did something that was absolutely incredible because of so many different reasons, but one very simply, can you imagine accumulating hundreds of names, their ages, the locations, in terms of where they lived, the type of horrendous act that was inflicted upon them, meaning lynched, murdered, beaten to death, be it cops, be it some white mob or something. That's what they did. So it's not just, they took a petition to the United Nations. Oh, yeah, they did. But to compile data that literally gave you the names, the dates, the age of our people who were, brutalized, victimized, etc. This is what they did in 1951. No internet, So, again, why is this not something that we have embraced or have understood in 70 years to the degree that it has? Only in these past 70 years has there been, to my knowledge, roughly 3 campaigns coined We Charge Genocide. And each one was, very kind of like, a report. One group did go to Geneva, but again, it was like a couple of months that they kind of did what they did. And interestingly enough, even though they focused on police murders and so forth, there was also another agenda. And the agenda was kind of talking about some other kinds of rights. Anyway, yeah. And so my point is that fortunately, as things would happen, we are blessed, our people, MWM in particular, and being being in this vanguard to provide accurate, clear information about 1951, but also the things that are related or around that era. Here's another little tidbit, and I'm going to go right into September 4th. 70 years ago, and this is connecting to what's going to happen in September, but we're also putting a call out to black women. Why? Because, again, 70 years ago, several black women made the call to Negro women. The call of Negro women was for black women or Negro women at the time to come together. As a result of a poem that was issued by the great Bea Richards, who many have probably never heard her name before, even though she's an award-winning actress, writer. She played Sidney Poitier's mother in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and always played dignified, honorable roles in her career, always. But anyway, she wrote a poem called A Black Woman Speaks in 1950. And in doing so, she talks about the issues of white supremacy and white women and things of that nature, and why, a black woman need to be saying something. In 1950, she introduced that poem in 1951 to a group of women who loved it. It was a mixed group of women, but they all loved it. But then some black women, Negro women at the time, said, we got to do something. And so roughly 7 or 8 came together initially, and they put the call to Negro women. Well, it just so happened that a trial was coming up of a black woman who was being charged with murder. She was being charged with murder because, she killed the white man that tried to rape her. So these serious women seized the time, because during that time, a lot of black women were being raped, particularly by white men, and nothing was being said or done. But also the issue of violations of our people, period, was of concern. So, to connect the dots for you, 1951, black women came together, Negro women came together. We will do the same thing this year, but it's a difference, and here it is. We will be adding on to our agenda the issue of reparations. Now, they didn't say that in 1951. They did focus on the violence and abuse of black women and girls that wasn't being addressed by hardly any groups, even the civil rights group that were talking about civil rights violations. But to fast forward, let me just give you a few names of those women to show you how well-rounded this call was and the seriousness of it. The great Shirley DuBois, of course, the wife of William Patterson, and her name just escaped me, her first name, but William Patterson's wife, who was the co-signer or the co-writer for We Charge Genocide in 1951 with Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson's wife was also, Eslander Robeson, was also one of the women in this group. But there's another name. Is anybody familiar with the name Audley Moore? Let me see now. 1951, roughly 7 black women came together and put the call out. What was the call for? For black women or Negro women to come together to do what? Demand a meeting with the President of the United States. 1951. So they decided to go to Washington, D.C. in 1951, demanding a meeting with the President of the United States. But they held a conference first. Now, the President of the United States would not meet with them. However, he did send a representative, and they did put their issues out. The name of the group was called the Sojourners for Truth and Justice. And so now, my sisters, we're doing a reenactment, something similar, as well as the continuation, in honor of Queen Mother Moore, in honor of, oh, by the way, I didn't say that Audley Moore was, in fact, Queen Mother Moore. She was along with these women. So, in continuing these legacies, the We Charge Genocide 21 is that combination of these 70-plus years, because we've connected the dots, of course, with Mother Callie House. And so we use that changeable language, meaning we're not saying just reparations. We're not saying just restitution. We're also saying retribution justice as well as restoration justice, and not just in the context of the prison or the judiciary context that they have interchanging with a so-called victim and their accuser, blah, blah, blah. We're not talking about that sort of restorative justice. But the point being, to now bring things forward, and let me make this very clear. Our position and statement is we are in full support of NCOBRA. That has to be made clear because, as I'm sure some know, there's some issues or things have been said or, things have been raised. Again, you can never dismiss the work of others, whether you agree with what it has achieved or what it's doing or what it didn't do or whatever. For Black folks to try to undermine the work, the Kazi, the sacrifices, all that went with that's dishonorable, and we certainly would not make any attempt to do that. And so I want to put that on the table right here, right now, that what we're saying and doing with Recharge Genocide is because of Queen Mother Moore, because of Paul Robeson, William Patterson, because of Malcolm X in 1964, who took this plight to Africa, met with heads of state, addressed the African Union in asking for support for us here in dealing with the issue of human rights violations. So these are some of the connecting dots. Now, lastly, with the call to Negro women, we now, MWM, make the call to Black women in our demand to meet with the President of the United States and the Vice President. Why? Because they said it was Black women that were very instrumental in getting them in office. Mm-hmm. We're saying, oh, thank you, wonderful. So now we want to meet with y'all. And we have 5 areas that we want to talk to y'all about. And one of them is reparations, reparatory justice. What are we talking about here, President Biden and Vice President Harris? Since Black women got y'all in all help really get you over the top, what have you done for us lately?
Mm-hmm. Then he say somewhere in one of them speeches, he said he got our back.
Well, we shall see. And because the historical precedence is already there, 1951, y'all go look it up. More than roughly 150 Black women did meet in Washington, D.C. for a conference. Some of the footage is archived at Smithsonian. They did meet. They did have a rally. We will do the same, September 30th through October the 2nd. We are demanding a meeting with President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. 2 different them did at the same time. And again, we just want to ask the question. Since you have said clearly that we help y'all get in office, so what are we talking about here? For Black women to make that kind of statement, I think is not only necessary, but it is groundbreaking. To do it collectively. Women representing groups, organizations from different genres, from different professions, you name it, to come together to make that statement. This, again, will further, because if nothing else, if they don't meet with us, it's cool. Well, it's okay. We have done due diligence. We have done what we're supposed to do as Black women for our people. Because we're saying political prisoners, President Biden.
That's right.
You see, 400 plus years, Vice President Harris, and we will cite you cases such as Tulsa. And if you don't want to, if you want to say, well, that happened before the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was signed. Okay, let's say the bombing of Move, 1985. I think y'all signed it. Little, right? Okay. So the We Charge Genocide 21 encompasses 21 areas, whereas previously the We Charge Genocide campaigns focused on police and governmental terrorism and things of that nature. Our campaign, our project is at least a 3-year project, and we let people know straight up this is not an overnight thing, just as NCOBRA has been in the forefront of reparations. And there's many folks that wouldn't even say in the word reparations if it wasn't for NCOBRA.
That's right.
Okay? So, I don't have a problem in saying that. And I think it behooves us to recognize this stuff is a lot of hard work. And while many may have expectations of certain things, that's fine. But until you roll your sleeves up, until you have sleepless nights and so forth, we need to really put some of that in check. Really. I mean, because it's unfair and it's dishonorable, as I said. So, again, some of us have to say these things, and some of us will. So, on September the 4th, our position, we start this process. And the process is boots on the ground, starting on September 4th. In our communities, we're asking people, please sign on to the letter of intent. What's the letter of intent? This is not the petition yet. This is the formality known as due notice. We're bringing you a notice of intent. So we will deliver a letter of intent in December, somewhere between December 10th and the 17th. December 10th is International Human Rights Day. But December 17th is the actual day that Paul Robeson delivered it to the United Nations in 1951. So the committee will be deciding very soon which day, based on the calendar at the UN. We now have that calendar. So that determination will be made very soon, but it'll be between December 10th and December 17th. Our call to our people is this. We want 400 plus delegates, official delegates, that will go with us in delivering this groundbreaking document called Letter of Intent, which will be accompanied with our first 1 million signatures. So on September 4th, that's what that boots on the ground gets kicked off. That means we want folks to go to the website, download the Google Doc, get the document that just says I agree, the letter of intent, sign on to that. We're asking people, just get 9 people and yourself 10.
Empress Chi, if you would mention the website address, I don't think I have that, and I'll definitely put it in our descriptions for those who come and listen to the archives. But could you mention the website, please?
Absolutely, yes, sir. And the website is being updated because we're changing a little of the language. We've consulted with some of our legal people, but you can go to the website and get general information, which is WCG21.com, as in We Charge Genocide 21.com. If you want some direct information or you've got questions or whatever, we are more than happy to respond to any emails. We are very proficient. Brother Jamoki could tell you, we do the email thing like seriously. So feel free to email us anytime, anything. nationalmwm@aol.com. Again, nationalmwm@aol.com. Or our National Black Human Rights email is nbhrproject@gmail.com. Again, the We Charge Genocide 21 project is connected to what we call the National Black Human Rights Movement. On September the 4th, we begin the process, boots on the ground. People can come, sign on to petition to the letter of intent. Again, we have 2 months from the September 4th to, pretty much we want to kind of be ready in October. Okay, but, we have some leeway. But again, we want to take the first 1 million signatures to the United Nations on or around December 10th. Between December 10th and December 17th. That's the first phase. So that everyone will know, there is the next part, which is the mass assembly, which will take place in Washington, D.C. next year. This year is at the United Nations. We want the notice to be given to them first at this point in time. Then we proceed with the U.S. stuff, which we'll convey at another time in terms of the strategies that and the embassies that are in Washington. The September 4th date is selected because our position is there can no longer be recognition, celebration, discussion around Labor Day unless there's a discussion, representation, examination of the free labor that was inflicted upon our people in this country. And so a few days before the recognized Labor Day, we will make certain that the issue of enslaved labor will be brought to the forefront into the world. That's why we will assemble at the United Nations to make that statement along with what we call the Declaration of Self-Determination. Because, again, this is a process. And at some point, we will have to identify ourselves as an entity. Because when you're dealing with international law, at some point you have to have a recognized position, which, again, as you will hear us talk more about, in conjunction with other groups, organizations, and nations, we will talk about proceeding with what we call pre-plebiscite sessions. And again, if it hadn't been for people like Baba Herman Ferguson, President Amari Obadeli, I would not know anything about a plebiscite. That's how I learned it. Okay. So again, what we're talking about and doing is things that we have learned from others, and we recognize their role in these things and are prepared to unite and consolidate and work with any group, organization amongst our people who are also doing that work genuinely so. Because there's some BS out there, and yes, I said it.
Yes. So, well, you said a lot. People kind of got a picture of what we're talking about organizing and how we're planning on moving. What I know you have so many different, like, we should say, sub-strands of the way that you're moving and organizing. And I remember seeing something about the House More initiative. How does that fit in? So Cali House legendary.
Absolutely.
Representation that Queen Mother More legendary.
Absolutely.
So what is
by the way,
House More initiative? Yes, go ahead.
Right. And again, one of the things that one of my elders made it very clear to me before his transition was he said, you've got to institutionalize your work. And that elder was the great Reuben Battle. He was the President General of the UNIA, or one of the President Generals of the UNIA. And he made it very clear to me that he was one of the elders who did embrace the Million Woman March and the work. He, Baba Kwame Ture, and a few others made it very clear that the work that we were doing was necessary, and they supported it. And so Baba Battle said, you must institutionalize what you're doing, because other than that, it's going to get lost in the sauce. So in doing the evaluation and research and so forth, we said we want to make sure we're going to keep Queen Mother Moore's legacy alive in the way that she would want, or at least we believe that she would want. So we stayed in very much contact with the sister who spent many, many years with Queen Mother Moore. And, of course, that was Dr. Dolores Blakely. And so, from her, we've been able to get information and other kinds of insight that only she would know. Whether people like it or not, it's true. You know what I mean? You got to deal with the truth at some point. And so we she stayed connected with us over the years. She has helped us in whatever way that she could. We have different positions on other things, but there's some things that, is good. It's clear. So as we developed this, we said, how are we going to keep Queen Mother Moore's vision, mission in the way that she would want? Because Dr. Blakey will tell you, she's not a nationalist. A black nationalist. That's not really her. And she's not into some other things, but Queen Mother Moore was. So we said, okay, we've got to make sure that we uphold this legacy. And lastly with that, before I go right into your question, Baba, I went to Queen Mother Moore's going home services. I don't recall seeing many there. Yes, I said it. Unlike other services that I went to Dr. John Henry Clark's, I went to Dr. Joseph Benja Cannon's, and, packed house around the corner, whatever. That wasn't it with Queen Mother Moore's, y'all. I was there. Now, again, that was a wake-up call for me then. And the other thing that was a wake-up call was when one of our sisters went up to speak and was not allowed to do so at the same area that the brothers were allowed to speak. They were allowed to speak the actual podium or whatever that the men and the ministers were allowed to speak. But the women could not speak there. They had to speak from the floor. I saw this with my own eyes. I saw this in 1997.
Certain church denominations. I'm familiar with that.
I know. I saw it. We saw it. And I felt very bad about that. And I felt that Queen Mother Moore would feel kind of bad about that.
I'm sure she would. I'm sure you're right.
Absolutely. So to answer your question, Baba, so we knew that, again, Mother Callie House, and we call her Saint Callie House as well, as we do with Saint Queen Mother Moore, because for the Million Women March Universal Movements, we created a structure as quiet as it's kept. And we have 20 sister saints, and Queen Mother Moore is one of them, as well as Mother Callie House. They are Saint Callie House and Saint Queen Mother Moore. So we looked at how we felt the necessity to show the connection and the consistency in this work, which is why you'll hear us sometimes say ex-slave compensation, just to, keep that phrase out there. And then, of course, reparations, which Queen Mother said, y'all go get y'all reparations, children. That's what she used to say. And that's what Dr. Blakely taught us, that she would say these things. So we looked at it and said, okay, how are we going to make sure that the work is researched, documented, transmitted, etc.? So I contact the Vanderbilt University, which, of course, for those who don't know, is where the Callie House Center is, on Vanderbilt University, the campus of Vanderbilt University in Tennessee. Because Mother Callie House, Saint Callie House, was born in that area, but I just found it interesting that it was a white institution that, in fact, has the Callie House Center. Anyway, we contacted them, and
we're kind of coming up to the end of the show, so we have to.
Okay. Well, let me say this right. Let me say this right quick, because it's counting down. We will be on air still on Blog Talk. On Black Talk Radio stream, but this Blog Talk stream is going to end, but it will continue to record. So we need to go a little bit over. That's fine.
All right. Thank you, brother. So to kind of fast forward, so the House More Initiative is to do what Baba Raymond Battle taught, which was to institutionalize the work. So it is not just the House More Initiative. It is now the House More Institute that we are building and developing, so that proper research, think tank, whatever the folks who are involved deem necessary to do to make certain that the work, the mission, and so forth is continued and achieved, etc. To learn from, what has happened, the fact that the St. Callie House was incarcerated, just as the Honorable Marcus Garvey, for doing this work. And so we have to make certain that we have our own emergency funds and war chests connected to this. Because we already know what the enemy is going to do in some way, shape, fashion, or form. It might be a little different, but we know they're not just going to sit back and just say, oh, they're going to do such good work or whatever. We have to be prepared to fight back all across the board. So the House More Institute is designed to educate, evaluate, train, to provide scholarships when possible, in the areas, in the fields that we're dealing in. We need our own everything and certainly not to, to make certain that as we proceed in the demand for reparatory justice, that we can do so in every way possible by any and all means possible.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks so much for sharing that and all that you've shared. I was trying to think of a word that kind of describes you, Empress, when I was giving your introduction. It talks about how you put things together. And I said networker, but networker really falls far short of what you really do in terms of how you understand the linkages between different organizations, between different individuals, between different movements, between, nationally, internationally. You really have a very holistic, truly holistic perspective on understanding, our movement and the different aspects of our movement and incorporating that into the work that you do. So I just, I'll continue to look for that right word, but I just wanted to thank you. And if you want to give out your website and email information again, thank you for your contribution to Conversation Reparations.
I do have a question before she leaves. If she would just explain, when you said the elder said, make sure you institutionalize your work. Can you explain what he meant? I think I have an ideal, but I want to hear it from you.
Absolutely. Well, again, to make certain that we build and that you have something to build from. So it has to be put in book form. It has to be put in brick and mortar form. It has to be put in every format that is necessary or feasible. So to institutionalize your work is to make certain that you have points of reference, but also that you have formulated it in such a way that it can be transmitted and continued. What happened from the 1950s up to roughly about the 1980s or so, what happened was we began not to document things. You see, COINTELPRO and just the overall white supremacist system really created a void. And so many of us really, because I came what I call after the good stuff, meaning the 50s, the 60s. I went to college because I thought what I heard about and read about was still going on. I didn't go to college because I really was trying to go to college. I wanted to be involved in this thing that I was hearing about. But unfortunately, I came after, right at the tail end. So none of that was really going on. My point is, everything now, or a lot of what I learned, I had to dig it up. I had to really go get it. It wasn't like it was right there. So to institutionalize your work means it is visible, viable. It is, very accessible. We have to have things. We don't have any institutions all over the country. We have no educational facilities all over the country. No schools for our children, for the most part. 1, 2 here and there. But for the 21st century, we have few, far, in between independent anything from educational facilities. Where's our health facilities? Where are our cultural facilities that are not being funded by somebody else, where they can pull the plug anytime? So institutionalized for us means that we're creating the scenario. We're creating the ideas, the concept, what it is that's going to be presented, what it is that's going to be provided, those kinds of things. Institutionalize our work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I have posted the website link to in both places, so those that are listening later or listening now, I have posted it again. That website, WCG21.com. WCG21.com. Any final thoughts, Jamoke?
And
Empress Chi?
Yeah, Let me just add to that. Please bear with us on the website because it's being upgraded. We are changing an administration on that website, but feel free to contact nationalmwm@aol.com if you want any additional information or whatever. We have folks ready and willing and able to provide you with whatever information. And lastly, all donations are definitely appreciated because we do not depend on grants or corporate sponsoring. It's the people that we are looking for to support. So our Cash App handle is $HOT1111. Again, $HOT1111. Our PayPal transaction is nbhrproject@gmail.com. Again, nbhrproject@gmail.com. And, of course, that's for the National Black Human Rights Project.
All right. Thank you so much, Sister Empress. And so you've been listening to Conversation Reparations. I did just want to acknowledge that, in COBRA we did have our national convention at the end of June, and we have not had a real report out from that yet, but we do plan to do that soon and have some of the guests and organizers of the National and COBRA online convention, which was held June 25th through the 27th. It was a very powerful gathering and of reparations thought leaders. And so we will do a show where we kind of give the where do we go from here and some of the highlights from the COBRA National Convention. So look forward to that in upcoming episodes as well. And you've been listening to Conversation Reparations. And you find out more information about NCOBRA at ncobraonline.org. That's NCOBRA, ncobraonline.org. You can also reach myself directly, Brother Jamoke, at reparations, J, that's reparations, the letter J, at gmail.com. And we want to thank Brother Scotty Reed, our engineer, and Black Talk Radio Network for giving us this opportunity for Conversation Reparations.
We won't renounce the debt. America bounced the check. And no, it ain't all about the dough, but my people still poor. Reparations is due, so just give me what you owe. No, we won't renounce the debt. America bounced the check. And no, it ain't all about the dough, but my people still poor. Reparations is due, so just give me what you owe. Capitalists are the enemy, but we can treat it like the villain. When prison is homicide, cause they making it killing. And war generates more loot, so that's why Bush is going off. Half-cocked like Joey Butter, you don't care about jobs and things. So I gotta use my pen to get money like an ATM machine. The economy's at its lowest by far. So why the black man gotta work hard like male porno stars for my soldiers at NCOBRA. Hold your head, it's not over. Jim Crow ain't dead. He just got a little older, more colder. So we gotta be less passive, more bolder. Shoot on the tail, can wag the road when the plant field ain't level yet. I thought you knew. Only credit they'll get from me is an IOU. And I don't care about no damn quotas. Just give me what you owe for force to take it back like Sankofa. No, we won't renounce it.
Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.